Is there a right way and a wrong way to construct a story for a comic? Are there simple, universal truths that all comics must adhere to? It depends on who you ask. Hey there, this is Perch. I've talked to a lot of writers over the course of my, so whenever I start saying things like over the course of my career, that always sounds like this death speech that I don't particularly like. But anyway, I've talked to a lot of writers who, will give their view of how a comic should be constructed and created, how collaboration can occur. And there's a lot of variance depending on the writer and kind of their style and what they do. But in addition to that, there are a few things that kind of stand out that always seem to click on the list. And as I talk to different writers, I like to kind of pull out, what's your style? How do you approach a story? How do you approach a concept? And more importantly, the part I'm really always keen to learn about is how does a collaboration happen? So, of course, there are some creators that are the writer, the artist, the color, they're doing it all. But generally speaking, that's not what's happening. Generally speaking, you have a writer who's coming up with a story, and then they're paired with an artist. Sometimes the writer gets to pick the artist they're paired with. Sometimes the writer can give suggestions from a pool, and then other times the writer is just kind of paired with somebody. What's interesting is I've rarely seen it. It has happened. It's just it doesn't happen as much these days. Is a artist who then gets to pick their writer. That's more rare, I would say. If you're at a really top tier level of artist, then you are able to, I think, have some control over who you work with the other direction. But generally speaking, it flows from the writer to the artist, and the collaboration that occurs consistently when a comic book is being made is there's an outline that's written up that's almost like a teaser or a marketing pitch or a elevator pitch. I think is the term that's used a lot. A very basic synopsis of here's some crazy idea, and this idea is often far more bold than what actually will come out in a comic. It's usually a little bit more um, expansive in terms of the story it's being told. It usually is shooting for a bigger idea that then once run through an editor, the editor may make suggestions. Depending on the editor and kind of where their mind's at, the editor may make suggestions around, hey, if you change these things, it will fit more with other comics that are in the portfolio, so you have a more harmonious world. Or they might make suggestions of, hey, this story you've got here is, you projected for 6 issues, but I think we could make it 12, so let's decompress the hell out of it. Or the other direction, let's make this arc 4 issues instead of 6, that kind of thing. Occasionally, I don't think this happens as much. Just again, I'm going completely off of kind of more recent conversations. Editors aren't suggesting things like, hey, use this character instead of that character. Occasionally, in the big concept pitch, although you have to be a bigger name writer to be able to play in this space, the bigger pitch will include things like, I want to kill off this character, or I want to marry this character, some fundamental change to that character's status quo. Those tend to be, those require a bigger level of trust, either a former relationship or that writer's proven themselves by doing other things. But generally speaking, those pieces of collaboration aren't usually pitched, especially by newer writers, by the bulk of writers coming in. They might have some kind of long in game that's coming up. But very quickly, the collaboration turns to the artist, and then the artist will generally come in and kind of give some more feedback on the story around, hey, this part will be fun to draw, this part will be terrible. I think we can tweak the story here. The artist, I think, is not really impacting kind of big story beats, but is more impacting the flow of the story, depending on how the writer puts it out. And now the writer themselves has a pretty big variety of different ways that scripts are written and put together. There's different methods. There's very loose scripts. There's very tight scripts. The tight scripts tend to have a little bit more input into what the artist is doing, or maybe even the writer is drawing a little kind of thumbnail of kind of how it will flow. But there's generally a little bit of back and forth that goes on there. The looser scripts tend to put more emphasis on the artist, and depending on the artist, here's where I've heard polar opposite opinions where some artists love the looser script because it gives them a lot more control and it lets them kind of do it their way. And others believe that the looser script makes them do a lot more work, that it's almost unfair because they have to carry a lot more of the burden of how the comic actually gets constructed. And so, at a normal page rate, they then have more work to do because they kind of have to envision things out. It depends on the artist. I tend to hear very very differing views. Like it's black and white of people who like one or like the other. And if a artist gets stuck in a situation where they're dealing with a loose script and they don't like it, they are pissed and they don't want to work with that artist or that writer anymore. It's just a burden. They're very very frustrated people. And the alternate is also true. You get an artist, and I'm trying to think of some examples. I think that as I recall, Mark Bagley was one of those people who was kind of fluid with either way. But Mark Bagley, as I recall, and I'm going off memory, so this may be wrong, I think Mark Bagley preferred a lot of the looser script, but didn't really care one way or another. He's maybe an exception to everything I just said, but I think he preferred the looser script because he could kind of chart it all out his own way. And then I think that as I recall, Greg Capullo likes the tighter script and likes to work kind of in that model. But again, I'm going off of memory, and as I'm saying the names, I'm not sure I've got that right. I'm like, this is a story from a story from a story, so I'm not completely sure I've got this right. At any rate, the key there though is in this collaboration. There's a lot of kind of emails that are exchanged. There's hey, look at this that goes on. What is also curious is that I found that a lot of, there's a small group of creators, and a percentage wise, let's say 30% group of creative teams that just get each other on the phone and talk things through and kind of walk through it that way, write up some notes. And then there's a bigger percentage that seems to want to do everything through email. And then I'm finding more and more comic creators are slowly discovering Slack, and that's seeming to be a real boon, particularly for editors that are managing multiple titles at once, so they can set up private groups and lock them down and kind of see their entire world in one picture. I think Slack is going to be a major, major tool for comic book creation and collaboration in the near future. It has all the feel of being something that will solve a lot of problems. But what's always been confusing to me about that is why more creators don't try and get together on the phone, because it just seems faster to ask questions, answer questions. On the other hand, I've heard the feedback, and it's valid, that if you put an email, then you've got something in writing, you can refer to it later, you're not creating the extra burden of having to write notes, so that all makes sense. Anyway, that's the back and forth of how a comic gets created. It is very much a team effort, the collaboration and the comments that go on, and it's why you will see certain creative teams reuniting over and over, because once you get something that clicks, when you get something that you have one group, a writer and artist who kind of understand each other, can move a little bit faster because they know kind of the different style or the beats that one creator likes over another. And you see it just from a pure pragmatic kind of time saving standpoint. I mean, let alone the fact that a lot of these people become friends. From a time saving perspective, it just becomes like shorthand. It becomes a really quick and easy and efficient way to give feedback and do the thing and get a comic created. And so I think that's why you see a lot of these creative teams come together again. It's not, as the companies market them, it's not like the superstar winning creative team who brought you this. It's actually the relationship between the two that is the important part of all this. I think that everything I've said is probably pretty obvious. You may be listening to all this going, he hasn't really revealed anything new. He hasn't said anything special. That's what I think anyway. But I get this question a lot of like, how do comics even get made? How do creators even talk to each other? Do they just do they ever meet? Yes, yeah. Generally speaking, the creative teams meet in person sometimes, usually at a con or other things. But it's not uncommon, particularly for new writers or new artists, to go quite a while working and putting out comics without actually having met face to face. It's another reason why tools like Slack and Zoom and things like that are going to be so popular. I guess I left off one big tool I know a lot of creators use. They use Google Suite, Gmail, and they use Google Groups, and they use Hangouts, and they use these kind of tools to do their thing. The challenge with all that is that it's just doesn't have the structure, and so I think as people are slowly figuring out G Suite, a lot of those tools feel like kind of the last decade. It's like it's almost an okay boomer kind of moment. It's just it no longer feels optimal or efficient or new. And so you see these new tools like Slack, like Zoom, like others, where like you could have a conversation, you could record it, you can file it away, you can tag things in it, you can, have nice indexes if you're an organized person, which granted a lot of creators are not necessarily organized people. But if you're going to be successful in the field, having some organization certainly helps a great deal. Anyway, there you go. There's my take on the matter. You probably have some thoughts on it. Leave your comments below, some questions, some things I didn't answer. These are very basic things, everything I just said, of course. So I'm curious what you have to say. So leave me a comment, like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.